Listen up, you landlubbers. You keep talking about the naval cutlass and glorifying it. But what about the cooler pirate saber, the Dussack, which could very well be called cutlass or a variety of other things. I'm not going to obsess over the terminology. I'm just going to call it what the maker calls this one, Dussack. This is going to be a double review, sort of, but also not really, because these are just two versions of the same model, both made by Adam Bodorics. And before you get excited, this pair is not suitable for dual wielding, because this is not a left-handed version. The shell is supposed to be on the outside. To sort out some potential confusion, Adam owns Landsknecht Emporium and works there, but this is his solo business, and the two are separate entities. So for his solo business, he does mainly custom work, but he also has a few standardized models like this. This project originally started out as a custom recreation, or interpretation, if you will, of a Dussack depicted in the hand of François L'Olonnais, a French pirate who did his buccaneering work in the 1660s in the Caribbean. That portrait is from 1684, by the way, and it's not the greatest image. It looks like the quillons are drawn reversed. At least generally you would not want it this way, you know, digging into the back of your hand and interfering with a range of motion. Adam was drawing from different sources and created an amalgamation of elements. So this is not a replica of an individual sword, but something that could very well have existed. Before I give you my impression of the quality and show you the test results, just a quick disclaimer. These were both sent to me for free to review, and the link to Cult of Athena I'm going to post in the description below is an affiliate link, so I get a very small kickback from each sale. So obviously, there's some potential for bias, which I'm aware of, and I'm doing my best to avoid, but you should know about that. The blade is made of 6150 spring steel, which is always a solid choice, and significantly better than what they had in history. As you can see, there are 3 fullers of different lengths. The longest one goes all the way to the end. You have a flared section here, or Yelman, as it's often called. It's sharpened here, so you can use false edge cuts with that. This is the lighter version, and you can see the difference in the blade thickness. The heavier one is thicker and has less of a distal taper. The lighter version tapers a bit more substantially and is overall thinner throughout, and quite noticeably lighter. I should point out, heavy version can sound a bit misleading. The heavier one is what I would call light, under a kilogram. The light version is ultra light, I suppose you could say. The other differences are in the hilt. The heavier version has a thumb ring, which serves 2 purposes. One, well, it protects your thumb on that side. As you can see, a blade could not come down on that side and hit the fingers easily. And it gives you an additional point of contact, so a little bit more control. Personally, I don't find it makes a huge difference, but it helps a little bit. And this one is done nicely. I've complained about the Landsknecht Emporium Dussack before, Dorothy, which had fairly hard corners there, so not the greatest finish on that. I was a bit uncomfortable. This is much better. This is way smoother. This is really nice to handle overall, and the finish in general is better on this one. It's not the cleanest still. You know, this is done, you know, for, again, standardizing models as opposed to custom work to keep the prices down. He can make this way nicer, but you have to be prepared to pay quite a bit more if you want a much finer finish. But I do like the structure here. The hammer marks on that actually turned out really nice. The ridges are very defined. The shell overall looks quite good. Based on the color, I would have guessed that the connection between the crossguard and the shell is brazed using brass, but he mentioned that it's silver soldered. Not the prettiest, again, saving cost. That in particular doesn't look great. I do have to criticize, or at least nitpick that. The fit seems quite solid. There is a minor gap, if you want to call it that. So, not an issue. The wire wrap is nice and tight and looks good. You can see where it's secured here. hasn't loosened up in any way. You can see where the tang is peened over there. The pommel is apparently hollow in order to keep the balance a little further out, which makes sense for a sword like this. That's how they generally work. Again, more about that in a moment. Here are the differences in the lighter version. As you can see, no thumb ring on this and leather instead of wire wrap. Both feel good. This is not the kind of wire wrap that calls for gloves. Perfectly comfortable without. This, if I had to call it one way or another, this is maybe slightly more comfortable, but I do not mind either. And as you can see, the leather wrap is nice and even, also tight. The fit in the scabbard is excellent. In my book, this is exactly the right level of tightness where you can pull it out pretty easily, but it's in there firmly, won't rattle, doesn't come out. This, in fact, no rattle at all. It's not the prettiest scabbard. If I show you the close-up here, that in particular, it's a little rough. Not a fan of that, but at the same time, to get a scabbard, it's not a guarantee. Quite often, scabbards are sold separately for a pretty penny. Not all scabbards in history were pretty by any means, and the important part is that it works and that it does. Same with the heavier one, also a great fit. And you cannot confuse the two, obviously, because it's a different blade thickness, so only one scabbard fits each. All right, so handling and performance, aka test cutting. This is where the two differ noticeably, as you can imagine, and it's also where I struggle a little bit and have to get help, because apparently I have permanently damaged my right elbow, which is a bit of a problem for a single-handed sword that can really only be effectively used in the right hand. I did try to sneak around that a little bit by putting my index finger through the thumb ring and using it this way with my left, but of course my left is not as dexterous. So I asked the local HEMA instructor, Cyan Niles, if he'd like to help out with this, and he begrudgingly agreed. Everyone knows how much of an unfun inconvenience it is to mess around with a sword. Just kidding, of course. I stubbornly tried a few cuts with my right arm because I wanted to know what it feels like in the cut, which I immediately regretted. So then I tried it with the left, which also didn't go amazingly. Although, considering that the soap newspaper rolls are quite challenging, much more so than tatami mats, I could tell that the blade helps out quite a bit. With a sword that doesn't cut as well, it would have been a lot more difficult and messier. But either way, so in Cyan's hand, it performed beautifully. There were some really nice clean cuts with tight, efficient combat movements, no overswinging there. So the next one is going to have a core. And it was obvious that the lighter version makes it a little more challenging.
It doesn't have enough mass.
You can also get smooth cuts with it, but the lack of mass in the blade definitely makes it harder to get all the way through the target, and it requires more velocity. It's just a couple strands.
Yeah.
So basically you got it.
I definitely got to put more body weight into it because this is not like that one. I got nearly all the way through again, but it just
takes a bit more.
Yeah, just a bit more.
But you got through the core as well.
Yeah, I got through the core.
Overall, I have to say, while I appreciate light, well-balanced swords, this one feels too light. I actually prefer this one there, which is still well-balanced. I mean, what does well-balanced even mean? Well-balanced doesn't mean the point of balance is as far back as you can possibly make it. It means that it's well-balanced for the purpose. And as you can see just by looking at it, this is a stout, choppy boy, technical term. So you're supposed to be able to deliver pretty powerful cuts with it. And Adam mentioned that most of the original Dussacks he handled were a little more blade heavy relative to the length that is. As you can see, the point of balance is not that far from the hilt, just further from the point than you would see with a lot of other swords. And in this case, I think this is the right choice. Because this is it still feels light and well balanced. It's very maneuverable. It's pretty easy to cut even just with the wrist and by tightening the fingers. And this is already a respectable cut with such a blade in unarmored fighting. Let alone if you bring the elbow or the shoulder into it, that would be quite a powerful cut. I can use it in a slight handshake grip, although if you have large hands, you can probably only hold it in a hammer grip. And with this kind of blade, that's kind of to be expected because you're not really going to squeeze much reach out of this. You know, with such a short blade, tilting the wrist forward wouldn't really do all that much. You have to commit to really get in there and cause mayhem up close, which of course on a ship makes a lot of sense. And the reach on some longer swords can be deceptive because if you have a sword, say this long, depending on the profile, if it tapers quite a bit, then you may have to cut fairly low. Some blades have a center of percussion or sweet spot somewhere around here, so actually fairly similar to this, whereas this one is so broad all throughout and stiff too, you know, like this is quite a rigid blade, that you can basically cut up here and you're fine. So the handling is very appropriate for what it is and is supposed to do. It cuts beautifully, the edge is great. There is a noticeable secondary bevel, funnily enough more so on the lighter version than the heavier one. Not sure how well it shows up on camera, but in person I can definitely see more of a distinct line there compared to this one. Seems to be blended in a little more. Not the smoothest grind I've ever seen, but it's obviously not a problem. The cutting went off without a hitch, particularly with the heavier one, as said. I also did some blade-on-blade tests with these two, even though the test cutting in and of itself already gave me a good idea of the structural integrity, particularly the soaked newspaper rolls, but also the Tommy Maz with hardwood dowel. That puts quite a bit of stress on the blade already. But I wanted to do that as well because, of course, in a fight, there would be blade-on-blade contact. Even if you try deliberately to avoid edge-on-edge, blades will meet, obviously. Whether it be spine on flat, or edge on flat, or flat on flat. So that's what I did. Not crazy hard, but enough to send shockwaves through the entire sword and see if anything would loosen up. And there's some minor damage from those tests, which is to be expected, of course. Steel on steel will always leave a mark. The pommel on the lighter version moves ever so slightly. I don't know if you can see that. There's just a little bit of wiggle there. With use, that might loosen up more, so if you're planning to do a lot of tatami cutting and whatnot, that could be a concern. Not unusual for historical swords to have guards or pommels loosen up, but you know, for a reproduction, that is worth pointing out as a criticism. This one doesn't move at all. So again, the heavier version is superior in my opinion. It cuts better and it seems more solid too. Okay, so what's the verdict? Keeping the aforementioned bias in mind, trying to be mindful of the negatives and don't get carried away with the positives. You can moderate yourself a little too much in the pursuit of objectivity, but either way, even considering all that, I have to say, this is one of my favorite swords I've ever reviewed. This one in particular, the heavier one, I really, really like it. Like everything about it. The finish is not the prettiest in some spots. I've seen way worse, but you know, there are some areas that are not quite as appealing as they could be. But for the more affordable version, this is what you're getting, and in my book, it's great. Especially considering how underrepresented this type of sword is on the market. I mean, what's more underrated than a Dussack? A Messer, maybe? I don't normally come up with ratings, but if I did, it would be 5 out of 5 winches and 4.5 out of 5 for this one. Yeah, it's good. It's a bit perverted, but you know, I would kind of like a two-handed version of this. It wouldn't be the same thing at all, but it would be pretty cool. Anyway, hope you found this review helpful. Thanks for watching. Again, links in the description below and specs and all that. Have a good one.